And now we're going to worry something about, we're going to go back to the physical layer, and we're going to worry a little bit about WANs. Oh, we got a little bit of time. Why do I need to pay a carrier for my data? And what happens is, or the reason why, it's right here. So we think about the city. So I draw a lovely city. So here's my city. I've got the streets running through the city. I got some nice houses around. All right. Now, you think about Alexander Graham Bell wanting to create a TV empire. What he needs to do is run a cable to each person's house. Over this way. So I got to run a cable, and it's going to have to go somewhere. And you know what I would like, if I was the TV or the telephone person, is I'd like to use those, or I'd like to use the streets. Okay? What I'd like to have they basically want permission, we'll just say, to lay wire. Okay? They want to be able to put their cable in certain places, and they want the city to give them permission, let's say, to run it down right next to the road. That thing running down next to the road is called an easement. Okay? Usually you don't go down the middle of the road. You guys know what your easement is? Here's my easement. So I got the street. There's some dirt. Then there's a sidewalk. Then there's some yard. And then there's a house. Okay? The easement is all of this. And what this is the city actually has all the rights to this stuff. So they put in the sidewalk, and I didn't have any choice. Right? I couldn't go out there and be like, you can't put that sidewalk there, this is my land. Get off my land. Pull out a gun on them, right? The dirt's the same way. They planted a tree here, and the rule on the tree is I have to keep the lawn mowed really nicely, and I can cut the little tiny twigs on the tree, but I can't cut any big limbs. If I cut those off or dig out the tree, that's a ticket. Okay? So this is all easement. So what runs in the easement besides phone lines? By the way, I have a big old electric pole right here in the easement. Here's another little story. They were putting in new electric poles, and they came up to us and they said, what we'd like to do is our electric pole, we're worried it's not going to be stable. So we would like to have a cable that goes over the sidewalk. You guys have seen those steel cables coming off the telephone poles, right? You want it to run across the sidewalk and then anchor it in your yard. And it'll help to hold up the pole. You guys have seen those. They look like this. And they wanted to put this in my yard. So the sidewalk could be right here, and then that would be in my yard. So the guys come to me, and they're explaining it to me. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. Or no, my wife comes to me, and she says, you need to talk to these people. So they come and they talk to me, and they're like, yeah, they need to do this. And I'm like, well, that sounds okay. And they go to walk out. And my wife's like, what? What did you just tell them? I'm like, I don't know. She's like, I'm not having that thing in my yard. And I was like, oh, that's right. We can't have that in our yard. It's a good thing she said something. But the other thing is, she should have just told them herself. But anyway. So we don't have a thing sticking in our yard. Because they would have had to get permission to do that. They didn't have to have permission to dig a hole. So the easement makes it so the carrier has permission to put the wires. Okay? So the carrier gets permission to lay the cable, and it's via that thing called the easement. Now here's the other thing that happened. There was a little while, and this has especially happened with phone. In the early days of phone, there were lots of competitors. And we love competition, right? So what that meant was, if you looked at a high-rise building, so we got a nice office building here, and there's like 5 different companies in here. What we'd get is one of the companies would be from AT&T, and they'd run, I don't know, there's 5 different people in there. You guys remember star configuration, right? Star topology. You have to run 1 wire for each phone you wanted. So there's 5 offices in there. I'm going to run 5 phones at this company's office, 5 cables. Company number 2 comes along and they say, look, we want this, we got the other business here. We're going to run 5 wires for this company. You guys can see where this is going, don't you? And then they might have, like, this company might decide, oh, we don't like this first company, we want to go to the other company. The old company doesn't take their wires out. The new company puts in more wires. And eventually they have so many wires coming off of buildings that they're actually pulling the walls off of buildings. Those were happy days in telecom history, okay? So there was lots of competition in those days. Okay? But eventually it starts consolidating. You guys have seen this happen, right? There's sort of the initial big, like, land grab days. Like, remember in the early days of the internet, there was all these companies that were like Amazon, and then Amazon was like, we rule all. You guys remember there used to be more search engines than Google? You guys have heard of Bing, right? That's actually relatively new. There was, like, before Google, there was probably 50. And they were all different. Anyway, Google sort of monstered over them. And so what happened with phone companies is eventually the bigger companies started to win out. But what happened then is they had all these extra cables around, and these companies had borrowed money. Oh, we'll just put, okay, so everyone borrows to put in the cable. And then if you can't make your money, oh, this is fun. Once you've laid the cable, you guys remember this fixed cost, right? Once you put the cable in, and you've got, now we got 3 sets of cable. It makes sense for each of these companies to charge as little as they can. You guys remember this from economics, right? You have your long run average cost curve. You guys remember all this stuff, right? And eventually what does the price move to? You guys remember what? What's the equilibrium point when you have so much competition? The marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So they move the cost. The cost is going to be as low as possible to meet the cost of actually just servicing the line. So let's say, it costs $10 a month for the phone company to provide the electricity to make this line work. So they might charge the companies $11 a month. Because there's so much competition, if they change it to 12, then these other companies are going to come in and take their business. Right? Highly competitive business?
I get it.
You can get your head around it? Okay. So the problem is, everyone has borrowed money to put in this cable. So they have a fixed cost every month to pay on their interest, administrative expenses, whatever. But the marginal cost of the customer is so low that they can't recover it. We'll just put here, they have to price high. So just, I don't know, you think about your cell phone company. There's a lot of competition, right? And the cell phone company would want to get you to move to their company. And you notice there's very few companies like Verizon, the really big ones, they don't match the really cheap companies' prices. You guys have seen that, right? It's because they need to make their money from, they got to cover the cost of this stuff. Anyway, so they have to price high. What eventually happened in these days, there's lots of bankruptcies. And there was also only service to businesses, apartments, basically wealthy people. Okay? And you don't really want that. You want to have lots of people with access to phone service, and you don't want every company in the world going out of business. So they awarded, so the cities, the states awarded what they called a monopoly. Well, we know what a monopoly is, right? Okay? So they award a monopoly to their area. They call that the incumbent. And then it gets fun. Okay? So this is how it works in telecom land. So you have an incumbent.